Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and it's another one of those shitty fucking weeks where I'm trying to get through this intro. I've only had one of these weeks before, and I think it was actually the outro of the Gus Kenworthy episode, where life for my family, and especially my wife, changed. And it's happening again. What am I talking about? Well, an hour before I recorded this episode, I was back at the hospital with my wife after a routine blood test a day earlier showed an anomaly, and the doctor ordered a scan. While we don't have all the details as of this recording, it looks like bad things are happening again. And I'm not going to say more than that because, well, I'm not. We don't have these details. I will say that Ange is really brave, and whatever she goes through, I'm going to be right there by her side. But right now, an hour after I recorded this episode, things are surreal, like a bad dream. This is all so sad and more so really, really scary. The uncertainty we have now is brutal, and I'm just crushed that Ange is going to have to suffer all over again. But, like I've said before, life is not fair. And I will say I tried to be as fair as possible as I could with my guests this week, American downhiller and U.S. ski team legend Chad Fleischer. So I didn't cancel or let Chad in on the fact that I was a mess. I did my thing and Chad crushed his end, sharing so much about Bode, AJ, Kyle, Tommy, and so many more. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to tell someone who skis or snowboards about this podcast. That helps the show grow, which is very important. But what's more important than ever right now is that you support and buy from my sponsors. I only work with the best, and they are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Rollerblade, Elon Skis, and Best Day Brewing. Now, it's time to talk with Chad Fleischer. Your nickname is The Butcher, and you received that on maybe the worst moment of your ski career, and we're going to kick off the podcast with it. We're talking about you're at Kitzbühel, the Hahnenkamm, the gnarliest downhill on the World Cup. You're killing it in training. You're in the zone. You're on the home stretch. You can hear the announcer saying, "This thing is yours," and the last jump is huge, and no one's ever pre-jumped it before, but you say, "Fuck it, that's what I'm going to do." Take us through what happens.
Well, it's just one of those days. I came into those races just knowing that I was on fire. I had figured some stuff out that you kind of work your entire career to figure it out. And I had done that in Rohrmoos in Austria, which is just above Schladming, during a week-long training session that we had going into Kitzbühel. And I told Kyle Rasmussen I had just finally figured it out, and a few other people. And there was no real answer to it. I just figured it out. I don't know how else to explain it. I just solved the riddle, the matrix.
Yep.
And those training runs, Luke Alfon was pre-jumping the Mousefolly up top. And to this day, I've never seen anyone else do that. I didn't even have the balls to do it. And I was a really good jumper. And I've been winning that bottom section the whole week in training. And I just decided that that's what my plan was. And I told Rasmussen that during our inspection. And we still laugh about it because he still says, every time I see him, which isn't very often anymore, he still says, "Man, I wish I would have just gotten on the radio and told you just to press it." But that's what it's all about. At the highest level, you don't always have to take risks to win. But I think if you talk to, like I have, you talk to Ted Ligety and Bode and Hirscher and Herman and Eberharder and Beat Feutz and Dominique Perry. And, I've talked to all of those guys about their best runs and what skiing means personally deep down inside you. And it's just seeing how much speed you can extract from any given course on that given day. I don't think there's anybody out there that just skis fairly complacently because they feel like it's good enough. And I think that's where Odermatt right now and Michaela Schifrin right now are a lot of fun to watch, as is the entire Norwegian team. Everybody just starts pushing it to a level where they're right on the edge of, well, as a guy told me one time, you guys are 100% in control of being 100% out of control.
Right. And if you look at your early career, half of your runs ended up with DNFs, it seemed like, just because you were on that edge and hadn't figured out the cheat code yet. And it was like you were always trying to push the limits. And eventually, do you realize that you can reel it in and actually get your skiing to be in a place to finish higher?
Yeah, that was certainly a challenge for me. I was a guy that made the ski team originally on the GS and slalom team. And I got fourth at U.S. Nationals, invited to go down to South America. I went down there. I did really well in some Continental Cup races, which immediately put me on the team. And I went from never have running. I think maybe I went on in one NORAM downhill in my life. And then next thing you know, I'm on the World Cup tour. So no, I mean, that's the DNF thing. You know, if you look at a lot of guys out there, whether it's McGrath or Broughton or, you know, I'd like to bring it always into the here and now, because it's super relevant for the ones that need to know probably the most about this sport, whether their parents are athletes, because the DNFs are part of this thing. And that's why I have not been a big fan of like the 30 start rule. You have to learn how to race, and the only way to learn how to race is to go for it on race day and not protect anything.
Yep.
That's probably the most important part of the sport, is being fast when it counts on race day. And so DNFs are part of the process. And in downhill, that gets very dangerous if you're actually crashing. You know, missing a gate or having to pull out of the course is one thing. But, you know, in my case, I went down quite a bit early on, and I was very, very lucky that I was as big and strong as I was, because I'm not sure many people could get, well, a lot of people were shocked that I could continue to do it and not be so fearful of doing it again.
Yeah, well, when you think of how big and strong you are, I mean, your skis absolutely exploded in that crash that we're talking about from the beginning of the podcast. I've never seen product explode like that before. Your Derby Flex plate stayed connected. I think that's what ended up ruining your knee and hurting your hip as well. But the way that the ski exploded was incredible. But you being a big, strong guy, it's not like you lay on the ground and wait to be carted off. You get yourself together, you stand, you bow, you curtsy. There's 85,000 people looking at you, and you walk over and you start taking shots of snops with them. The pain not set in yet? And is that a move that you make early in your career, that the Euros respect you a whole lot more throughout your whole career because of that?
Yeah, you know, that's just one of those things where I look at that now and I just start laughing, because, you know, I was just so lucky. That was the first race I ever wore back protection. We had just started using the Day&A back protectors that they use in MotoGP racing.
And you went 95 miles an hour to your back.
Yeah, and that was why I didn't like shatter my spine. So that was the first lucky part of that whole deal. And then second was just the fact that I was just so big and strong. I mean, I always prided myself in being as strong or stronger than anybody I'd ever compete against. I never wanted that to be a variable, because you can't, you know, you can't go into it going, well, I'm 80% as strong as everyone else out here. And so strength, and then the safety that was added right before that happened was a huge deal. And yeah, I don't really know why I got up and did what I did. I didn't even think about it. There was no cognitive thought to that. But outside of drinking the schnapps on the way down to the finish line, that was definitely a cognitive thought process.
Well, on that one, you ruin your knee, you do some stuff to your hip, and we're not going to really talk about your injuries in this podcast, but can you give us a real quick list of what you've done?
Yeah, so I recently had a neck surgery, a knee replacement, a left hip replacement, and then during my career, I had my shoulder surgery. I had a Bankart procedure because I dislocated my left shoulder. It got caught in a fence. My pole went into a fence and it yanked my arm out. And then, you know, all the rest of it, that's kind of minor. It's kind of major for most people, but I would say it's minor. I mean, my knee replacement was my 14th knee surgery.
Oh, shit.
I had 13 before that, 5 of which were total knee rebuilds. But I had never hurt my knee, like in a serious manner, until I did my knee in Wengen, which ended up ending my career.
Yeah. And when you think about like injuries back then, opiates were the way to deal with pain in the 90s, and it's easy to get hooked on them. While injuries happen all the time, have you seen painkillers ruin an athlete's career?
You know, I haven't seen them ruin an athlete's career, at least that I've been around, but I certainly have watched them single-handedly destroy a number of my friends' lives, and that's been really sad for me. Luckily, none of them are dead. Oh, actually, one of them died because of it.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, thanks. So it's a serious problem, but, you know, I will tell you that I was one of the guys that just neglected painkillers. I'd take them for maybe a day. If I did more than that, it would be 2, 3 max. And then I would always just flush them down the toilet. I don't know why. I just, you know, this was kind of before it was so well known now. I just knew that they were addictive. I knew they were bad. And about the extent of what I knew about painkillers back then was like Brett Favre's issues with them, right?
Yeah. And he was taking like 20 Vicodin and throwing them up and taking them again.
Yeah. So I just knew they were bad news, and I just didn't take them because I was like, if I'm going to be man enough to put myself in a position to get this injury, I'm going to be man enough to take the pain on and understand what I'm going to do to my body if I'm going to hurt myself. It was kind of a way to keep myself in check, if you will. not dumb it or numb it down, but just make myself responsible for what I'm going to do to my body if I'm going to do something stupid and hurt myself.
Sure. And then if you circle it all the way back to today, when you have pain these days, I would think that you use CBD. I mean, it's a proven alternative for some pain, and you're in the CBD business. You have a brand, Yuda. Is it Yuda because Yuda fucking man?
Yeah, Yuda. Well, unfortunately, when COVID came around, there's so many things happened with the whole CBD industry, with lack of classification from the FDA because they kind of closed the book on it and moved on to COVID and blah, blah, blah. So I really have removed myself from that business in its entirety, but I did get into it exclusively for one reason, because it was and still is an incredible way to deal with anxiety and pain and sleep deprivation and you name it. I didn't even know what it was. A friend of mine told me about it, asked me what I thought of it. Then I started trying it and I was just blown away. And that's how I got into that business. When you start taking Advil like crazy and all these other drugs, it's bad news every day of the week and something's got to give. So, I'm a very big believer in what CBD can do, and cannabis for that matter. For, my dad's going through some serious cancer right now. And it's amazing what homeopathic drugs can do. It's just too bad that people are getting in the way of continuing to figure out how we can make those work to the best and for the best of those people that are suffering the most.
So in thinking of you and CBD, because this is how I'm going to transition it into your childhood, just reading into how you worked with the business, it seemed like you were much more than just like a dude who was focused on spreadsheets. You knew about soil, pH, and the way shit was grown. Do you have a lot of interest in that because you're born and raised in Nebraska?
That was a big part of it. Farming, it's just something I've grown up around my whole life. I lived till I was 12. I lived with my grandmother on her farm where my mom grew up about half the time, even though my parents were married. I just loved being on the farm. So I spent about half my childhood out there on the farm. And then my grandfather had a big farm implement business, planters, tillers, shredders, cultivars, all that stuff. So when I had the opportunity to get back into farming, it was between designing irrigation and the planting plots, laying it all out. It was really in my wheelhouse and I loved it. Still love farming.
Growing up in Nebraska, I like to ask everyone if they were rich, poor, or average when they're growing up. But then I found an article on your dad's Hawaii property, Club Paradise. So I'm guessing you grew up with money. And when I think about that, why the hell would you grow up in Nebraska if your dad had money?
I would say that that's absolutely not true.
Okay.
I'd say that we were just pretty much a solid middle-class family.
But there was a property called Club Paradise, right?
My father still has Club Paradise, actually, in Maui.
Can you describe that? Because it makes it sound like it's more than just middle class. I'm middle class and I have Club nothing.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a long story to this. So I guess what I can say is that my father was a marketing guy, traveling marketing guy. He worked for like Stihl chainsaws and Lawn Boy lawnmowers and Kawasaki.
Okay.
And then he worked for Balin Manufacturing, which had the Quonset huts that you see on farms and silos. But my parents loved skiing, and they had loved skiing since day one. And so they bought a condo, sharing a condo with my dad's two brothers back in 1968. And I was born in 1972. So the only place we ever went on vacation was like once a year, maybe 2 weeks of the year. We'd go to Vail, 1 week in the summer, 1 week in the wintertime. So all I knew about vacation was basically a ski vacation. And when my dad decided to not be in marketing any longer, he decided to get into real estate. Well, he got a job working as a manager for a hotel in Vail. So we all moved to Vail, and we lived in a 2-bedroom condo, 5 people and a dog, 1 car. And we lived like that in Vail for 4 years. And my dad figured it out, we made it work, and he got involved in real estate. And like so many people in these ski towns, he made his mark in real estate in ski towns. And that's how my dad eventually got into this Club Paradise in Hawaii.
That's pretty rad. That's a cool story. It's like a rags to riches story, per se. You're middle class to figuring out real estate in a resort town to being able to parlay that into a better life for his family.
Yeah. We went to Maui for the first time in 1986. And my dad immediately fell in love with Maui. And he promised himself someday that he'd get a place there. And he waited. And my dad is one of the most patient people you'll ever meet. And he knew that he would have to be patient to be able to get what he wanted. And when the yen crashed and the Japanese pulled out of the real estate market in Hawaii and it crashed, that's when he went in
And that's how he was able to get his property in Maui like he did.
Well, that's awesome. I think he's a big windsurfer, and you guys probably do a bunch of windsurfing when you're growing up as well. But when you guys moved to Vail, you see Bill Johnson win the Olympic gold medal in 1984. Can you explain how that changes everything for you?
Yeah, I mean, that was an amazing moment for me because I didn't even know anything about ski racing outside of NASTAR, right? So I'm sitting there watching the Winter Olympics, and a friend of mine was in Ski Club Vail, but I just free skied and played hockey, and I didn't do anything with ski racing. And this friend of mine at school was telling me about this Bill Johnson guy. So we would sneak into Cyrano's at the top of Bridge Street where they had one of those old school projection televisions.
Okay.
And ABC Wide World of Sports was on, and we'd sneak in there and we'd watch the race. And that's when Bill Johnson had won like Wengen, right? So I'm like, wow, this guy's pretty rad. And then he's on all the headlines, and Franz Klammer's calling him an American nose picker. And he's saying that everybody there is racing for silver. Why are they even there? Because he's going to win the gold. And I mean, it's just, his comments were so bold. He reminded me of Evel Knievel, and Evel Knievel was like my childhood hero.
Okay.
And so I was like, God, this guy's like a god, he's just like calling his home run, pointing out to the fence. And then he stuck it. And when he came down and he stuck that, I turned to my parents and I said, that's what I want to do. And my dad took me to Ski Club Vail a few weeks later and talked to him about signing me up for the next season. And they said, well, it'd be good for him to come out this spring and do some little tryouts and just show us what he's got. And, I went there and it was embarrassing as hell. I mean, it was just like my dad had trained me to ski like Wayne Wong. I was a total hot dogger. Shaika Gramshammer, who's a great friend of mine still. We went to school together. She nicknamed me Swivel Hips. But I was a new kid. Hockey didn't go well just because it was really political. And, I scored a winning goal in this like qualification for travel team, but I still didn't make the travel team. And I was just like pissed, and I wanted to be a ski racer at that point, and I had a lot to prove, and I wasn't going to let a bunch of basically Euro kids who were certainly a high ski pedigree in many ways chase me out of the sport. I can't even tell you how much fun they made of me because I was from Nebraska and because my dad duct taped my top sheets to try and save the top sheets so we could sell our skis for more money when I outgrew them. And, it goes on and on. I wasn't that good, but I knew what I wanted to do, and I was very athletic and strong, and I needed coaching and I needed time because nobody was going to stop me.
And you're coming into a storied program. I mean, Ski Club Vail has pumped out some amazing skiers over the years. When you enter Ski Club Vail, I mean, I'm sure people have a 5-year head start on you, so that's got to be embarrassing as well because you got to figure out the whole race thing. But are there some names that eventually become big names that are in Ski Club Vail while you're there?
Yeah, I mean, Karen Lancaster, Mike Brown, Amy Lavran, Nate Bryan. I mean, those were all U.S. ski team alumni that all came out of Vail. And then there were others that weren't maybe national team, but they certainly were some of the best in the country by far.
Well, and just the division that you're racing in is like the who's who, I guess. I mean, on the East Coast, there are some serious competitors as well who are going to those academies there. But it seems like if you're in Colorado, you are in the right place being with Ski Club Vail. Yeah.
Back then it was you were either with Aspen or you were with Vail or you were with an academy out east, which would be Burke, Stratton, or GMVS.
Yes.
There were like 5 places in the world you could come out of. And then, Glacier Creek Academy actually came on the scene hard with Mo and the Makar brothers and some of those other guys too. But that was a bit of an anomaly for a short period of time. I think Chip Woods was mainly responsible for that.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm going to start things out with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. It's summertime, which means if you live on this planet, it's hotter than ever, and that means it's time to get in the water. And Peter Glenn is the one-stop shop for all of your needs. Think wakeboard, water ski, kneeboard, tubes, swimwear. They have everything to make your summer more fun and functional. And they're a Rollerblade brand dealer, so you can take care of your inline needs as well. Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the products, a knowledgeable staff to help you, and a best-in-class website if you can't make it to their stores. But that's not all. They also have a low-price guarantee, free shipping on orders of $50 or more, and a hassle-free return policy, which is very important. Peter Glenn isn't one of those big guys trying to take over an industry. They're the mom-and-pop shop that you've trusted for almost 70 years. If you like this podcast and want it to keep going, please buy from Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. To find out more, head on over to peterglenn.com. My next sponsor is Rollerblade. the brand that invented inline skates. Rollerblade has been keeping skiers in shape since 1980. If you've listened to this podcast and my interviews with US ski teamers, all of them use Rollerblade branded skates to get where they are today. It's the only all-season sport that mimics the motion of skiing and utilizes the same muscle groups. So really, it's a no-brainer that if you want to get better on your skis, in the park or at speed or anywhere really, inline skating is going to make you better. Remember, running wrecks your knees, and biking is proven not to get your legs in ski shape. If you want to start ski season like you left off last year, download yourself Rollerblade's award-winning Skate to Ski app, pick yourself up a pair of skates, and get to work. You can thank me in early December when you're surprised your ski legs are that strong. To find out more about all things rollerblade, head on over to rollerblade.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, the iconic Northwest brand that invented the category of keeping things hot and cold over 100 years ago. You remember Stanley from your grandfather's green thermos that kept his coffee hot forever when he took you out on adventures. Well, Stanley still makes that bottle and so much more. Think tumblers, water bottles, barware, camping utensils, coolers, vacuum bottles. There really is something for everyone over at Stanley, and you aren't going to find them overpriced like a lot of copycat designer brands that have popped up recently. Stanley is the originator, and they pride themselves on providing you with the best products at the best value. And that value gets even better when you shop with my discount code. When you head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping. When you check out, enter the code shredthegnar. That's all one word, all lowercase, and you're going to get 30% off your entire order. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. There was a story that I found about your first race, and I didn't get the whole story. I just kind of found a little tidbit about it, and I figured I'd ask you about it, because I think it was your first race with Ski Club Vail, but it could be your first race on the US ski team. I'm not even sure. But there's a story about your first race and a herd of elk. What's that all about?
Oh, yeah, I remember that one like it was yesterday. I mean, I grew up, like I said, Nebraska, so I came from quite a big family of hunters and fishermen, rednecks of sorts.
Camo and orange stuff?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And I've always been a big avid hunter and fisherman and myself. And my uncles were always, going to Colorado to elk hunt, even when I was growing up when I was a little kid. So this big storm was there a couple days earlier. And then here we are in my very first race, and I'm getting ready to go. And I look across, and there's this gigantic herd of elk right above I-70 on the south-facing side of the slope. And I turn to my coach, who's Jim Tracy, right, who went on to become my U.S. ski team speed coach, who went on to be like the winningest downhill coach. He was there when Mancuso and Vaughn won the gold and silver, Vancouver, you name it. I mean, he's a legend, and he's a good friend. But he grabs me, right by the bib and pulls me up and starts screaming at me. We're here for a ski race, not to look at the damn elk across the way. And he's just like totally yelling at me to get my head in the game. And that was just a trip, man. I was like, whoa, this is crazy. That was my first race ever, and I think I got like a silver in that race. And I was pissed because I wanted to win. But I won my next race, and then I didn't really stop after that.
It's like you kind of go really fast into making the team, because here's kind of where I get confused. I'm able to find that you took 13th at Junior Worlds in 91. You're like 18 years old. And then you make the US ski team at 19. But I can't find any results for you in 92, or not many results. And then in 93, 94, you're on the World Cup circuit, like you said. So it sounded like you went to South America and you did really well there and made it on the team in the World Cup circuit. And you have 6 races. Your best finish is 24th. And that qualifies you for the Olympic team. It's like, holy shit, how do you make the Olympic team so fast?
Well, I can tell you what happened in 92. So I make the team. I go to Europe. I'm skiing fast. But then they give my spot away, even though I qualified. They give my spot to Jeff Olson.
Just like political bullshit?
Oh, yeah. Like, that was the biggest bunch of bullshit ever. I mean, it was involved a grown man crying about how he's going to lose his sponsors and how I was young and up and coming and had no proven track record on Val d'Isère, and he did. And for him to get paid and blah, 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 he needed to make the Olympics. And he was literally like crying to my coaches while I was in the hallway stretching. And that really bummed me out, because my parents had flown over there. I had earned my spot, and they gave it away, even though it was a qualifier and I qualified. So that was pretty harsh for me for my very first World Cup that I should have gotten a start in. But they kept me there the next week for a group of races that were called FIS B downhill races. I won each one of those races by like 3 seconds a race.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I had a lot to prove, right? So I was pissed, and I was like, okay, you're going to keep me here. I'm just going to like beat everyone's ass like I did. Just destroyed everybody. So Val Gardena World Cup was going on, so they didn't want me to go to Val Gardena because they thought it was just too dangerous. So then I couldn't go to Bormio because that was too dangerous. And they didn't want me going to Kitzbühel or Wengen because those were too long and dangerous and whatever. But everything that I was doing in these little FIS races, I kept winning. So they were like, well, fuck, we got to put this guy in Garmisch, right? So I go to Garmisch, Germany. My first 2 training runs are awesome. And then it starts pouring rain. And I wake up the next morning, like on race day, and it froze solid. So we're talking like the iciest I've ever seen a hill anywhere in my life was that morning for the race. And I wake up and everybody's all quiet. I don't know. It was just weird. You know, everybody's so quiet. And I was like, what's going on? And they're like, well, if you weren't so lazy and you'd get up and run in the morning like most of us do, because they all went for a little jog and would stretch, and you'd know that it froze solid last night. It's pure ice out there. So I was like, okay. So I go to the table, the little buffet table, and I get some donuts and Danishes, and I come back and I throw them at them. And I go, here's some sweets for you little pussies. Maybe you guys need something to cheer you up a little bit more. And, you know, I was like pissed and I was in their face about it. And so I went out there and raced, and I'm watching AJ on the tube. He just takes the biggest digger ever in the middle of hell. That's towards the bottom of the run. So it's my turn. I go down and, you know, I'm having a great run all the way down. And then I get to that same section where AJ crashed, but I'm coming out of the exit there. It's the exit of hell. And my legs are so fried that I just fall over and I go straight into the net at like 80 miles an hour. And I scorpion like you read about. My very first World Cup race, I get a helicopter ride.
Oh, man.
And needless to say, with my antics that morning, there weren't a whole lot of my teammates that came and visited me in the hospital.
Right.
Because when it comes to lack of experience, that's why those guys were so scared. And that's why I was just like, fuck you guys, man. Like, what I didn't know when I was younger is that there's amount of calculated risk and you got to ski within yourself. Where for me, I put my poles over the wand, even though I was a rookie. Like, I wanted to win. I was asking my coaches if there's ever been a rookie that has won Kitzbühel.
Right. That's how confident you were.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to outdo what I was capable of with confidence. I didn't care. I did not respect anyone because I felt like the only way that you could win is if you went out of the starting gate to win. You know, that's when they first started the World Cup start list points and all that. And I had no interest in World Cup start list points. I only had interest in like seeing how fast I could go down a mountain and trying to win. That's it. I didn't know how to qualify for the Olympics. So when I qualified for the Olympics or World Championships, I had no idea how that happened.
You just skied as fast as you could?
I just skied as fast as I could. I was oblivious. For the first couple of years of my career, I was completely oblivious. Like that first year and the second year for the Olympics, like never once did I think about how do I make the Olympics? What criteria do I need to meet to make the Olympics? When they said I was named to the Olympics team, I was completely shocked because I had no idea how you even did it. I had no idea. So it's pretty funny, man. I could tell you so many stories about how oblivious I was my entire life.
And when you think about it, it sounds like those guys that were on the team weren't taking you under their wing right away. They were letting you figure shit out through failure almost. But if you think about it, you've got AJ Kitt, Tommy Moe, Kyle Rasmussen. You've got some legendary badasses on that U.S. ski team. And for a crew that was so talented, was it almost a letdown that they didn't get more podiums than they should? I mean, I don't think they got almost any podiums, really. Because eventually you'd take second in Spain a few years later, and you're like the first American to get a podium at a World Cup event in like 4 years. But we had a stacked team. What was the problem with them not figuring out just that final hurdle to get on the podium?
So there's a lot to that. And to kind of get through it quickly, I'd say that, you know, AJ definitely took me under his wing, hands down. AJ and I are still great friends. I mean, I'm still good friends with Tommy and Ras as well. But, you know, AJ had his shit together. He had just finished second in the overall World Cup downhill standings in 92. He became my mentor. When I first made the team, he sat me down and just said, hey, listen, you know, you're never bigger in this sport. Be a professional. He kind of walked me through a lot of things, pitfalls. And I thought that was just so amazing for a guy that was that good to do that for me when he had no reason to. Was something I'll never forget. And we still talk about to this day. And he doesn't really remember it that much, but I mean, I do like it was yesterday. That's how significant that was to me in my life.
Okay.
I will tell you that Rasmussen, when I first made the team, was struggling so hard with Salomon boots that were just falling apart and exploding into pieces, and was skiing really poorly. And Mo, for the most part, wasn't really living up to his golden child status. So those guys were still in kind of the figure it out mode when I first made the team, where AJ was definitely still on fire. And then AJ got injured, and then Mo ended up doing what he did at the Olympics.
Yep.
And that totally put him on the spot, and then he blew his knee out the following year. And so you have AJ coming back from his injury, and then dual tech equipment from Rosignol was so bad. So he got the double whammy, right, of bad equipment and his injury.
Not too many racers use cap skis, do they?
No. That almost bankrupted, and it destroyed Rosignol until like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it almost bankrupted the company. And I was with Rosignol when I first started. The only reason I didn't stick with Rosignol is because Peekaboo Street called me and said, do not test their boots and do not ski on the new skis. She said, all my new skis, they're just retopping them. I will not ski on those cap skis. They're no good.
Okay.
So I had some good inside information from, because Peek and I had grown up kind of our whole lives together. So I had some good inside information from her as to what was going on with Rosignol. Then I went to Dynastar in Lang. I was one of 4 guys in the world on Dynastar. So it was Mo, Amat, and Girardelli, and me. So that was pretty good company. And I was sharing a serviceman with Tommy. Then Tommy got hurt. And then Rasmussen came on the scene. And that's when Rasmussen started doing really well. So, I really kind of like evolved with those guys, AJ to start, and then Tommy. And I really cornered Tommy on some things once he had his success at the Olympics. Like, what did he learn? What did he do differently? And then with Kyle, when Kyle was on fire and the best. So I really did have the ability to learn from those guys when they were at the peaks of their careers. And ultimately, that's what helped propel me into my final phase of my career when I decided to rededicate myself to the sport and whatnot. But, there was a long period of time in there where I was really struggling to find myself through it all because, my mom was battling her really bad brain cancer like she was for so long.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. So you're, I would say you're in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, it seems like, on the World Cup from like 93, 94 through 97, 98. And this is all while your mom's sick. I think she passed in 96. I'm really sorry about that. But I can imagine that you're spending a ton of your time caring for your mom. You're spending a ton of time prepping for races. You're traveling the world and you can't be with her. How hard is that for you mentally? Just like wanting to be on the phone and wanting to talk with your mom, but then having to be in Wengen and having to be there and there. I mean, is that just a total challenge? It just leaves you in a terrible place?
Yeah, especially, back then it wasn't like it is now where you have FaceTime and Zoom and whatever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was fax and Global Connect with AT&T. It wasn't pterodactyl and stone tablet, but it was damn close compared to how it is now. And my mom and I think, that's the thing is my mom and I were very, very close. My family as a whole is very, very close. So when she passed away, she really wanted me to go and felt very strongly that I needed to be in Team France training to get ready for the upcoming Olympics and everything. And so I went, and then I got a phone call that my mom wasn't doing well. And there were times where she would go in and out of not doing well. But this time my dad called and said, she's just really not doing well. You should probably get on a plane. And by the time I got home, she had already passed. And that was where I just was done with skiing. I was away from my mother. She passed away, not that I could have done anything, but I wasn't there when she passed away.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to be at that camp in Team France. And, it still is really painful for me to even talk about, but I had to deal with that. I had to internalize that because when you're on the ski team, it's not that no one cares. You just don't have time to deal with that because it's just too heavy. And when shit's toxic or heavy and it doesn't involve like yourself, you just can't deal with it. And that's, I think, what people don't understand about pro sports is it's great that everybody's a part of a team and that you're all trying to work together as much as possible. But the second that you're not skiing fast, that you're negative and you're toxic is the second you've put yourself on this island that's as far removed from any piece of land ever that it can be a very, very lonely and dangerous place because nobody wants to touch you. And that's how I felt. after my mom had passed away. It was like no one really knew how to talk to me, but it wasn't normal. And I wasn't really like ready to fully integrate with my team. And it was just really, really hard all the way around.
And this goes on for like 2 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard. Like I wanted to quit. I hated ski racing because I was gone when my mom passed away. But I knew that I had contracts and a career and I was good. And I was meeting with our sports psychologist with the ski team, Chris Carr, who was amazing and had a lot to do with actually just making sure I didn't actually walk away from the sport. And, you know, and he's the guy that was working with Indy 500 drivers and Indianapolis Colts and you name it. I mean, He went on and still doing amazing work. And that's what I mean by you got to internalize this and you got to go on a mission. And it's almost like this soul seeking. And it took me a couple of years to kind of get through it. But it almost didn't happen. You know, I almost didn't do it. And then that's when I found myself and rededicated myself and got my leopard haircut and did the stuff that I did to just say, this is the new me. Like, this is going to take me changing who I am as a human being to get the most out of myself.
Well, before we get into your transformation, it's like you have this terrible time mentally because of everything that's gone on in your family. You still end up making the Olympic team and you go to Nagano. And that's a shit show for all the ski events because the IOC doesn't look at weather patterns over the past 100 years. They look at dollar signs and they're idiots and they kind of cheated every skier out there. But I'm guessing that you're kind of just going through the motions through that Olympics because you're still in a bad headspace.
Yeah. I mean, one, I had no business being at that Olympics. I really didn't. So I was loading my bags to come back to the United States. And as my bag was on the belt at the oversized thing, Egan comes up to me and goes, do not put your bags on that belt. Change your plans. You're going to Nagano. I was like, what? 10 seconds later, my bags were like gone off the belt. That's how down to the wire it was. And I know he was fighting for me because he knew that I was good. He knew I was struggling with, my mom's shit. But, I just switched to Atomic. My equipment was fucked. My boots were fucked because Technica switched the mold out. And, this is not like excuses. There's just things that happen. And the only reason I switched to Atomic was because my Dynastar skis were breaking the year before in the middle of my runs, like literally snapping in half, and I would fly into the fence.
Like, that's ridiculous.
So that's like your wheel falling off in a car race.
Right. That's crazy.
Like fucking so dangerous. I can't explain it. And then, of course, I go on Atomic, and then they have the SVAR bindings that are actually the rear is breaking and the bindings sliding off. So that's going on, and Brian Stemmel comes up to me. He's like, "Oh, you didn't know you can't use those SVARs? Like, I can't even believe USA Atomic's like giving you those. You can't use those." like crazy shit. But welcome to being an American ski racer. The Euros and everybody else in the world knows all the things that we don't. And so that's what makes the sport so crazy is that you're always the underdog. You're always the underdog in American ski racing. And that's why I think it's amazing that you look at the skiers that have gone above and beyond, especially with Bode. I mean, Bode's a god because he's a guy that did it on all the different ski equipment that he's done it on. And he did it at the highest level. I mean, to do what he's done with all the different manufacturers is just something that is truly unique and special. And I still think to this day, nobody's a better skier than him. In the history of the world that's ever been involved in the sport, I still think he is the greatest skier because he was able to do it on so much different equipment. And I can't even begin to explain how hard that is to do.
It's time for my second sponsor break, and I'm going to start things off with Elan Skis. I started telling you about Elan building a cult following in the States about 3 years ago. And if you're like me and heading to the mountain on a weekly basis, I know you've been seeing more Elans by the day. Why? Because they'll make you a better skier. The product that Elan puts into the market is second to none. I mean, Elan's a company that also makes luxury yachts, so you know they're not going to cut corners on materials or production. They're built in Elan's proprietary factory, one of the most sustainable in the world, and the difference in quality is noticeable. Walk up to any ski wall and compare the craftsmanship of an Elan ski to the rest, and there's a difference that you will see and feel. But when you get them on the snow, that's where Elan really shines. From my ripstick models to my new favorite twin tip, the Playmaker, Elan keeps making better and more fun skis every year. If you want to have more fun on the mountain next year, head on over to elanskis.com and find the pair that's best for you. My final sponsor is Best Day Brewing. And I'll tell you, I've been loving having Best Day as a sponsor, as it's really helped me change my ways. See, I'm a binge drinker. While I don't drink that often, when I do, I put a bunch back. And my issue is that, like with everything, I drink way too fast, and within a couple of hours, I need to go home because the alcohol has gotten the best of me. But not anymore. Now I'm managing my fun time by making sure that every other beer I drink a Best Day. And by doing that, I've been having my best days and nights ever. I can stay out longer, I'm coherent, happy, and I don't feel like crap in the morning. And they taste so good. I'll put a Best Day Hazy IPA up against any alcoholic IPA in a blind taste test, and you won't be able to tell which is which. On top of that, Best Days are only like 60 calories, which, like drinking less alcohol, is something that I think about these days. While I'm not asking you to quit drinking by any means, please support me and your health by heading over to bestdaybrewing.com and order a six-pack or two. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. I'm going to get back to a setback for you because you have another one at the end of 98. You're in Europe and you get salmonella. We've all heard of salmonella, but what does that do to your body?
Oh God, that was such a disaster. I mean, I don't know where we were. We were somewhere in Austria. I forget now the town, but I certainly remember when I got this chicken cordon bleu. Next thing you know, I was just like, yeah, like not good at all. And it got worse and worse and worse and worse.
I mean, I read you lost 30 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to think, like, I finally got to Loch, Switzerland. I was there for some Super G. And at that point, the only thing I could put in my body was like sips of Coca-Cola and some chocolate.
Right.
And that was just to try and get my energy to where it was. And it was just a complete and total train wreck. And then I say that because on top of that, that's when Mo cut his hand at the Londoner. And that's when somebody else did something. Like, I think Rasmussen had just blown his knee out, possibly. In Wengen, I don't know. But I was like the only guy left on our entire ski team. And I had salmonella. So I was like, we had no team left. Our team was decimated. And I was like the last guy standing. And I was sicker than a dog. And I lost, like you said, I mean, I think I ended up losing like 27 pounds or something crazy. So yeah, it was just a shit storm.
And then from there is kind of the montage that we can set up about you hiring a trainer, approaching the 98, 99 season, and you working your ass off. You get yourself in shape that you've never been in before, it seems like, as a ski racer. I remember seeing the final part of your makeover in person at the Club Chelsea one night because I lived in Vail those years. And I remember looking over and there's a guy at the Chelsea with leopard printed hair. And that was you. And is it true you dyed it like that because of an article you read?
I'd picked up a magazine about snow leopards and their plight, about how, they're super elusive, they're super endangered, and, they're just hanging on to try and survive in an environment that's just incredibly difficult. But there's not really that many people that care or know about them anyways. So, they might just kind of end up extinct and as this unknown species of sorts. And it just reminded me of myself, quite honestly. And so I was like, wow, it just really hit home for me. I reflected on that quite a bit. And that's really what started my whole transition for everything. I went and got my hair done. I called my trainer, this trainer that I worked with when I was much, much younger. That was a good family friend of ours, and I just said, would you be willing to do this with me? And he goes, I've been waiting for you to make this phone call for like the last 8 years of my life.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, yeah. And then we just kind of grew the team from there. But more than anything, it wasn't like it was, we did a lot of really cool stuff training wise, but it wasn't anything special. It's exactly what I do with all the kids nowadays that I work with and train and coach. But more than anything, it was mental. Every single day I was with my trainer, it was like, you were working out 2 or 3 times a day, 6 days a week. And I had a nutritionist on staff. I had a massage therapist full time that was dedicated just to me. I had him. It just goes on and on. And so, I dedicated all my resources monetarily to hiring people, paying them and investing in myself and spending money, knowing that, I'd be able to recoup that by becoming somebody in the sport, becoming one of the best. And that's what it took. It took me hiring and forming my own team and dedicating myself to making sure that I was going to get the results that I wanted and needed to make money and have a career and get what I wanted out of the sport.
This is kind of the mental switch that you're talking about. But living in Vail at that time, we did see you at the bars, whether it was Garfinkel's or Garton's. Your hair made you stick out, and you were, I feel like, a man of the people. Like, you didn't have any shame on going out and having a good time. So first, what was your best Garten show? And then what was your favorite BB&B memory?
Gosh, you know what? I don't even know. I really don't know, to be honest with you.
I think we saw you there at Super Diamond once.
Yeah, Super Diamond. That's right. You know, I was gone so much, right? So when you're skiing on the World Cup level, I mean, you're gone 9 months out of the year.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I'd come to town, I mean, I used to go to, remember Nozawa, the sushi bar in Westvale?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my friend owned Nozawa. And so when I'd come back from being out of town, I'd go to Nozawa, and I was actually the tempura chef at Nozawa for free. I would just work there voluntarily because my friend owned it who worked there. And then one of my other best friends worked there for him. And so I'd just hang out in the kitchen, being the tempura chef, and then we'd go out afterwards. And I'd only be in town for maybe, 4 days, 5 days. So we'd go out like pretty much every night I was there, we'd go out because that was my only chance to see everybody. And my dad dated Judy. That was the owner of Club Chelsea. So I was there quite a bit and good friends with Kent and Darby, who ran the place. And I pretty much knew everybody in Vail. And I had my entourage that I hung out with that was just a lot of really great people. And so I just loved it there. But my favorite BB&B was, I think, probably the Yacht Club down in Walcott. That place was awesome.
Okay.
They don't have it anymore, though. But, back in the day, that used to be pretty rad, BB&B.
Yeah, that was like the most fun day of the year, it seemed like, in Vail. But when we think about being at home, because I chatted with Ted Ligety, and he mentioned that for the Americans, when you're traveling all over the world and you're having to race, it's so much harder than being a European who's only a couple hours from home and they have all the comforts of home wherever they are. You guys are living bag to bag and going hotel to hotel. But Vail 99 happens, so the World Championships is coming to your hometown. When you first hear about that, how fired up are you?
Oh, that was like a dream. When they announced that back in like 95, I was with John Garnsey and Jimmy Roberts, and they were taking me down through the trails because Vail and Beaver Creek was like my main sponsor when I was racing. So they took me down before the run was even cut, like in 95 or even 94, and we were skiing the trees in the glade there off the top of the
Birds of Prey?
Of the Birds of Prey.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Before anything was even cut. And they were like, yeah, it's going to come here. It's going to go there. So that was just like, gosh, I had waited and waited for that for, the buildup of that was like 6 years. And I used to hike it every summer. It's just straight up and down there at the brink, and I got pinned there for like an hour and a half one time because of a major lightning storm right at the top of the brink, sitting under a tree. Like, I could just tell you so many things about how long I waited for those World Championships to come. That was still the coolest 2 weeks of my career.
And I think with your sixth in Super G at that race, I mean, that was your best finish in your career up until that point. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know if it was or not. Yeah, I think it was my best Super G race for sure. And it was so close. And I was in the lead there for a while. And I was in the lead by, it was a pretty commanding lead. Girardelli sitting there hugging me and telling me it's going to hold for a medal. And those bastards came down and snaked me. And and it was still awesome because they gave awards to the top six. And it sucks being sixth for sure. But, it was still the tightest race in World Championship history. Two guys tying for the gold, and second place is 100th out in third, right? Or
Crazy.
Third place, I guess. And it was just really amazing experience. And then the downhill, the weather moved in, it just sucked, and that was a bummer. But, what are you going to do? That's an outdoor sport in ski racing.
I will say that I was actually a doping control escort for Vail 99, and I took Lasse Chus, Hans Knaus, Herman Meyer, Steven Meyer, all for equipment and drug tests. And I will say that when I took the Herminator and his skis to get tested, because he did have to do his drug test, but they check the height of your boots and they check something else on your ski, I forget what. But they did not even look at Herman Meyer's skis after he won the Super G. They didn't look at him. They sat outside. All the dudes just high-fived him and were hugging him, and they didn't look at his gear. And I was there to witness that with my own eyes, and I thought it was kind of crazy.
Well, they didn't blood test anybody either, so I don't know. I just say that because we've been asking for blood testing forever as Americans, just because we feel like it's just where testing needs to go. But, the rest of the world doesn't want it. So it's not going to happen. But that's for all sports, though. They need to figure out how to really clean up sport, unfortunately.
I agree. They got to eliminate the Drago.
Yeah. Well, I just watched the Balco thing on Netflix. If you haven't watched that,
Yeah.
you got to watch that one. That guy's quite the character, and the fact that he pulled off what he did was pretty nuts, man. But
Yeah.
it's tough to be involved in sport. It doesn't matter what sport you're involved in. It's just tough to look at other sports and then see it happening, because there's people that play dirty pool and there's people that play it clean. And it's just unfortunate that it works out the way it does. That's all. I don't know how else to explain it.
Well, we'll jump into your biggest race. It's the World Cup final in Sierra Nevada, Spain. You come into the corral in second place, and is that like a total shock to you, where you're like, holy shit, I'm in second, and then you have to sit and wait in the podium position and watch people go down afterwards? Do you have that experience in that one?
I was really bummed that I didn't win that race. And I don't say that with ego, because I sat down with Darren on the plane down to Malaga, which is where you fly into to go up to Sierra Nevada. Drive from Malaga, from the airport there up to Granada and then up.
Okay.
And I told Darren when we were sitting in the plane, I said, I finally figured it out. And he goes, what do you mean you figured it out? And I said, I figured out how to win in this sport. I said, I figured out how to win at the World Cup level. So I said, this is exciting for me because I'm going into the finals now, and I know just how to get it done. I know how to do it. He goes, well, how do you do it? And I said, I don't know. I just know that I know. And I said the same thing to Kyle, like back in 95, before I had my crash at Kitzbühel. It's just the weirdest thing for me. There's just times where you kind of figure it all out with your equipment and your physical and your mentality. Like everything kind of comes together, right? And all I can explain is that, like the last training run in Kvitfjell in Norway, I won that training run by like over a second in the downhill there. And everybody thought I missed all these gates. And when everyone realized that I didn't, and I Euro-psyched, and I stood up the last two gates to the finish line and turned, and like every single European was coming up to me and asking, like, they couldn't stop asking me like how I was able to go that fast. Like no one could believe it. And I didn't put it together on the race days. And there are a few little reasons for that. But either way, I took all of that knowledge and I took it into Sierra Nevada, Spain. But it goes back to, the things about it. Our equipment. There are things that were equipment related that I didn't have access to it. Then I got access to it after the World Championships when I got that 6th place. And if you look at my poster from Atomic at the World Championships in Vail, I'm on a store-bought plate that you could get at Gorsuch. And everybody else is on these black foam blocks that they wouldn't give to me. And so then I finally got those foam blocks, and I took those to Norway and we started testing them. And every single run where I was testing those, I was at least 0.3 of a second faster per run.
Wow.
0.3 of a second faster in my sport is the difference between 20th place and winning, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. So there were just things that I took command of, threats that I had made, like breaking windows and taking other people's equipment. I got very hands-on.
You got to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, I knew that if I didn't take meaningful, threatening steps towards other reps for other athletes from other countries that had what I knew I needed to compete against those athletes to win, I was never going to be able to beat them. And so I actually started threatening to break windows and steal equipment. And if they didn't want to play, then I would play by my rules instead of us just working together to give me what I needed to have a level playing field. And I was able to access that equipment. And so, there was a lot of it. It was the mentality. It was me figuring some things out, but it was also me taking command of the battleship and getting the equipment I needed to help in that essence too.
Well, when we think about second place at that race, can you tell us about the bet that you had and then the after party for you?
So yeah, the bet with my dad was just, he was making fun of my haircut a little bit. And I said, well, when I get on the podium this year, you got to get that haircut. So when I got on the podium, he got his hair done like my leopard hairdo. So that was pretty awesome.
That is pretty cool.
The after party wasn't terribly exciting, because we had to wait, I think, till the Super G was over with, right? So yeah, Darren and I went out. But it was just at this place that I think we ended up walking out of there at when it was sunlight at about 6:30 in the morning. But there wasn't a whole lot of us there. So it was kind of no frills ultimately. But I guess the next day, Darren and I got a couple hours of sleep, and then we went down to Alhambra and checked out Alhambra for about 5 hours. So that was my best memory of like post-podium, if you will.
And we've talked a lot about gear malfunctions, and you brought up Ralph's. And was there a trip where you and Darren were flying from like Canada to France and you had a ski boot liner malfunction where you had to order yourself some new ski boots?
Oh, man, you've heard all the stories. You did some research.
I try.
Oh, yeah. We went deep one night, real deep. And, we sat around in Whistler for like whatever it was. I don't even know where it was. Yeah, we were in Whistler. We sat around in Whistler for like 6 days. And they never had the race. It just snowed and snowed and snowed. The best part about it was Ralphs and I went up with Rob Boyd, who was friends with all the ski patrollers, and we ended up just shredding some like crazy lines and like bottomless pow. And,
Nice.
And it was awesome. But then, our whole week was just a bust. And so we went to Vancouver and we were going to fly out the next day. And Ralphs and I went out and just went black, tied one on big time. And yeah, I ended up passed out in the women's restroom at the airport and using my boot when I was getting on the plane. I was so hungover. I was using my ski boot that was hanging over my shoulder as a paper bag receptacle that you'd typically find in your seat of your airplane. So I had to get myself some new liners by the time I got over to France there. But you always travel with 2 pairs of boots and some extra liners at all times. So it worked out all right. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was definitely, well, let's put it this way. I slept from Vancouver all the way to Geneva, Switzerland. So
that's a win.
It worked out all right.
Yeah.
It didn't require Ambien.
So you have one final Olympic push, and really, you have a shot. I mean, your last 2 World Cup results are a 16th and a 10th in downhill, which is pretty great for you. And looking at your career standings, like those are some pretty good finishes for 2002 for you. And I don't even want to bring up what happens, but a week before the 2002 Olympics, you are on the team, but then you can't compete. What happens?
Yeah, so going into that season, Atomic paid me 100,000 euros to switch to their boots.
Sick.
It was guaranteed money. So it was, it was a big boot contract. And then, of course, there's ranking and bonus schedules and all that. So
wait, that's just boots.
That's just boots.
So you're making $500,000 a year with all sponsors, somewhere around there?
Yeah. It was very good. And, the thing about ski racing, it's a very top-ended sport. But for those that make money in the sport, you can make a lot of money in this sport, hands down. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But, one, you have to be a personality of the sport because that's how you sell stuff, right?
No one likes boring people.
Yeah. You can't be a shadow. And so I didn't really want to use those boots per se, but that's just the way the industry's gone. They call it triple threat, right? So boots, bindings, and skis.
Yep.
And they were applying heavy pressure for me to go with those boots because they also made more incentive payments for my ski and my binding contract too, right? It wasn't just boots, but the big part of it was the boots. And the boots worked great when we were on soft snow at like a Portillo or when we were down in New Zealand or whatever. Like the boots worked. But then when I got into full World Cup speed on ice and standing up and turning at 80 miles an hour, the boots did not work anymore. In fact, I would go so far as to say they didn't work at all.
Okay.
And that was a real big oh shit moment for me.
Like zero confidence in your skiing?
Well, I had confidence in my skiing, but I knew 100% sure that it was the boots. And so I'm like, oh, fuck. This is not good because I'm doing everything I can to take risks at that point to try and make those boots faster. And you shouldn't have to do that when your equipment's working, right? You should be able to ski as good as everyone else and still be faster.
Sure.
Where it entailed for me just taking way too much risk. And so I told my coaches at the end of, I think it was maybe Val Gardena, and I said, listen, we need to go home. We need to get on the Olympic venue, and I need to test equipment, and I need to test my Old Lang boots against my Atomic boots and look at video, and I need to make decisions. I said, it's my boots and I know it, but I need to make sure that I verify it. So basically, everybody packed up and went back to the States because we got to ultimately train on the Olympic venue, which made a lot of sense anyway. So we go back there, we're training there. I'm looking at video and I'm like, look at these angles. These are angles I haven't produced. Look at the different videos. I have not had knee and ankle drive like that. I'm switching to these boots. And nobody wants to touch that because they know politically it's a giant mess. So the coaches aren't weighing in. Everyone's starting to think that, that's coach-wise, they're starting to think that maybe it's an excuse. And I'm just like, you know what? It's my boots and I know it. So we go to Bormio and we have one training run and 2 races at Bormio. So I take my first training run at Bormio in the Lang boots. I'm like fucking second to last place. It was not a good situation.
Okay.
But I'm like, I know these boots work. It's just me. I just need to get up to speed because, it's Bormio, man. Like, you never feel that comfortable at Bormio as it is. So going and just switching boots on the fly here, back to my old Langs, and keep in mind, I had no Lang contract. I'm not getting paid a dime from Lang, but this is for me and me being ready for the Olympics. So then the next day at inspection, I see Rudy, who, I forget his last name, but Rudy's in charge. He's the race chief for Atomic. He goes, I hope the boots work because we take the skis next, yeah? And he says this to me at inspection while I'm handing him my cashier's check for $100,000. This is a true story. This is the morning of the race day. I hand him 100,000 euros, and that's what he says to me. I hope this works because we take the skis next. So then you look at my splits on that run, and I'm like dead last all the way to the side hill. And from the side hill to the bottom, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Won everything from halfway down to the bottom.
Whoa.
And then the next day, I'm freaking 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 all the way down. And then I double cross block the very last skate of the course. I think Bode's done the same thing there and did the back slap down out of the course, back in the course. And then I think that was the one where I ended up 16th or 10th or whatever. So that's a very long story of how equipment can instantly turn things around. So I went from like not even being close to winning the toughest race in downhill. In my opinion, Bormio is the most demanding. It's not the scariest, but it's definitely the most demanding. And I had one complete run, almost to the very last turn, a complete run where I was first all the way down. And then I had ones across the board from the side hill to the finish line, which is probably the gnarliest, like last minute left in the world of downhill because of the light and because of the leg burn and everything associated with Bormio. So I was very, very happy with how I was tracking going into what was going to be Wengen, Kitzbühel, Garmisch, and then the Winter Olympics. I was like, this is set up perfect. That's why I have 5 national commercials right now. That's why we've been telling people we're on a mission to win gold in 2002. Like, this is everything you dream about. I've worked my ass off for this. I've taken nothing for granted. This isn't about money and ski boots for me. It's about what I need for me to be the best. Because if I'm focused on that, then everything else will happen success-wise. That's why the boots didn't matter to me. And then I'm there at Wengen, and I freaking cut a turn off, and the skis were really dull the day before. They were way too sharp the next day. And that's not to blame anything other than, just some stuff you're trying to figure out that's when they're injecting certain sections of the course and not everywhere. So you have really fucking slick, solid ice on a turn here and a turn there. But then it's kind of like Colorado ego snow most of the way down. And so we were trying to figure out how we get the skis to be sharp enough to perform on the really hard turns, but then not too sharp everywhere else because that's really slow, right?
Yeah.
And I just misjudged one of the turns. I cut it off with the side cut on the skis, and I clipped my shoulder on like the ice bank there. And it spun me, man, into Kernan S, as they call it. And that was it. I woke up on the ground looking at my knee folded 90 degrees backwards.
Oh.
I was in shock. I was like, well, I'll put a knee brace on. I'll be ready for the Olympics. And then I was like, oh, God, this is not good. I'll be ready for 2006. So I immediately just went right into 2006 mode.
And you did have a comeback kind of in 2003, but I don't think that really went that far. And then you've gone on to have Fleischer Ski Shop. I think you have a snow well at the base of Steamboat. You had CBD. You're a realtor. You're a dad. You're a husband. What am I missing with all the different things you do?
Well, my big passion project right now, I've got a big real estate development going on right now in downtown Steamboat. Got 9 acres on the river that I'm developing. That's 50 units total. So that's exciting. I've been working on that for the last couple years now. It's always been a passion of mine, real estate development. But then my biggest passion project right now is working with my son who wants to be a ski racer. So I'm doing everything I can to help him be the next downhiller in America. But with that comes my true passion project, which is speed development in this country. The last couple of years, I've been taking over the speed venue at Copper. And it's an invite of sorts. And I have Jonna McBride comes in and works with me. AJ Kitt comes in and works with me. And then I have some other coaches that we bring in to work with us. So we're teaching other coaches how to teach speed or coach speed. And then we're also coaching athletes how to become the best super G and downhill skiers that they can become in this country because, for the last 5 years, there's just been a really big push, unfortunately, in this country by the Kirk Dwyers. And, I think it's important to name names. And Kirk and I have sat down and we've talked about this face to face. So, it's not like I'm calling him out. But Kirk and I agree to disagree completely on when you should start running speed, when you should start coaching speed. Because the problem is walking away from skiing speed and coaching speed means you suddenly have athletes that can't ski speed. They're scared to ski speed. And you have coaches that no longer know how to coach speed. And if you look at the Norwegians are training and they're coaching speed at a very young age. And it might only be a couple turns here and a couple turns there at a young age, but they're elements of speed that they're introducing and they're coaching very early on. And so for me, as someone who fell in love with the sport because of Bill Johnson, and if I couldn't have done downhill, I would have never ski raced. It's that simple. And I'm not sure Darren would have either, because I was there the day Darren decided he was never going to ski slalom again in his life. I still laugh about it. So, it's very important that we keep in touch with our roots and we make sure that we give those that are involved in this sport because what they love to do is go fast and take chances. Like, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of risk involved with downhill. And that's why people love watching it.
Yeah.
They love watching it because there's so much on the line. Like, I love slalom too. It's its own sport. But the problem with people that are involved in slalom skiing is they think that downhill doesn't matter. But downhillers don't think slalom doesn't matter. But it's okay for a slalom skier to think that downhill doesn't matter, or a slalom coach to think that downhill doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. And that slalom and GS are ultimately the only thing that matter because those are the building blocks to be a downhill ski racer anyway. Well, Mark O'Sullivan, world junior champion. Beat Feutz, world junior champion. Steve Nyman, world junior champion. Slalom, right? So I don't think that anybody's out there hating on slalom or GS. We all know they're fundamentally super important. But there are 4 events in this sport. There's actually, alpine combined, and then there's parallel. But let's face it, there's 4 true events in this sport.
Yeah.
And the second you start saying that one is more or less important than the other, when they all are involved for the overall crown for the World Cup title, it's hypocritical. It's fucking stupid is what it is. And it makes me angry. And I think it's really disrespectful because the entire U.S. ski team budget has been built around the AJ Kitts and the Peekaboo Streets and the Bill Johnsons of the world and the Lindsey Vonns and the Ted Liggettys. And I'm not taking it away from other people, but I'm just saying, like, the really lean and mean and tough years were single-handedly funded by AJ and Peekaboo and Lindsay.
Agreed. Well, we don't want to get you angry any more than we have with this last part. So now it's the time in the show that we jump into inappropriate questions. This is where I get someone that to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. This week, I have a U.S. ski team legend. I'm talking about a guy with 6 World Cup podiums, a guy known as the King of NASTAR. I'm talking about AJ Kitt. And AJ, are you ready to serve up question number 1?
I am.
Fire away.
Okay, Chad, when you first got on the U.S. ski team, who did you like least? Me, Kyle, or Tommy, and why?
Oh, I like that one.
Oh, boy, that is a good question. I would say that I disliked AJ the most because I read all of his comments in the papers, and he was on the news and stuff at like U.S. Nationals, and I did not like AJ. I thought he was cocky, and I thought he just deserved a good ass kicking. But then he was nice to me. He became my mentor when I made the team. So then I had to take all that back. And I was like, oh, he's not such a bad guy after all. But I would say when I first made the team, it was certainly AJ before AJ became like my mentor, my good buddy.
All right. So that's question number 1. We'll jump into question number 2.
Chad, what's the dumbest thing a random person ever said to you because of your unique hairdo?
It takes more than a great haircut to be a good ski racer.
Who said that to you?
Chris Anthony said that.
All right. I'm going to jump into his last inappropriate question. Here we go.
Chad, I hope you remember this, but in 1995 in El Colorado, we had a big rookie night. What was the skit that you were doing?
Oh, boy. That was the Steamboat Sailor skit. There's a reason that tape got burned.
What's the Steamboat Sailor?
So Steamboat Sailor, like, I don't know, give me an S, give me a T. You know what? Back then, there wasn't all these hazing and different issues. All I can tell you is that I was dressed up in makeup and a G-string, and there was a reason our rookie night video got burned in the fireplace, because the evidence had to be destroyed, and there's never been a rookie night since that night. That's how crazy that night was.
All right, well, that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And looking at your life and times, I mean, you're a kid from Nebraska who's a self-described redneck at times, who's into hunting and fishing and stuff like that. And by 12, you make it to the ski world, and you make it to one of the best mountains in the entire world. But it's one of those things where you see something on TV, and then you vocalize it. Like, I see this guy win a race, I'm going to do that. And you let people know that this is going to be your future. And sure as shit, you made that happen, given through a lot of hard work, and you had to reinvent yourself in 1998, and you're able to turn everything around. But it's pretty incredible for a middle-of-the-pack guy like yourself for the majority of your career to really turn it on when you turn 28, 29, 30, and really kill it and finish your career as strong as you possibly could. So you were a guy that I saw in Vail, and you were like the biggest ski celebrity in Vail other than Seth Morrison when we would see him there. And that was always super cool seeing both of you out and about in the Vail area. And I appreciate your career, and I thank you for your time, man.
Thank you, Mike. You have a good one, man. Thanks again for having me.
So that was time with Chad Fleischer, and I love it when a guest tells it how it was like Chad did. No sugarcoating or anything, just the facts. And I'd expect nothing less from such a badass American downhiller. That's the podcast. At this point, all I have to ask is for you to rate and review me wherever you listen. It really helps the show grow, and it makes me feel good. And I need anything natural that can make me feel good these days. I'm sick of waking up crying, but that's my reality. And I love you so much. Everyone else, thank you for listening, and please support my incredible sponsors. There's Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Rollerblade, Elon Skis, and Best Day Brewing. Have a great week, everyone.